Welcome, everybody, to our June webinar. We are so excited to have Dawn Campbell with us, registered veterinary social worker from Vancouver Humane Society. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yes. So I'm going to let her share a little bit more about the work that you're doing and what we're going to be getting into today. I will be putting into the chat at the end of the session for the evaluation and post test if anyone is here for continuing education credits through ASWB, which is American. But I will have that in there. I'll be monitoring the chat. If you do have questions, you can put them in the chat, but we won't probably get to them till the end of the presentation. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in there. I'll be monitoring it. And Dawn, I will let you take it away.
Thank you. I'm just gonna share my screen now. And if maybe Lisa, if it doesn't show up. Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, thank you for the people who are here today. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. And as many of you know, and as this association is called, this field of social work is growing internationally, and it is growing here in Canada too. And so today we are going to explore what is happening across the region, where the gaps are, and where this work is actually already happening, and what opportunities there are to move forward. So I'll start just by quickly introducing myself. My name is Dawn Campbell. I'm a registered social worker living and working on the traditional territories and unceded lands of the Kwantlen, Matsi, Katsi, and Semiahmoo First Nations. And so that is in British Columbia. My perspective today is shaped by my work at the intersection of social work and animal welfare, including my role as veterinary social worker with the Vancouver Humane Society, and my private counseling and consulting practice, and my involvement in community-based grief and bereavement work. Prior to this work, I have nearly a decade of experience working on the downtown east side of Vancouver in supportive housing, outreach, and homeless shelters. And this is where I've witnessed firsthand the unwavering bond between people and their companion animals. And as you can see in the photo there, that is my dog River, who is sleeping right now. And I'd also like to acknowledge that this presentation reflects the contributions of many people. My understanding of veterinary social work has been shaped not only by education and professional experience, but also by conversations with practitioners, students, researchers, veterinary professionals, community organizations, and people with lived and living experience. I do not speak on behalf of all social workers, animal welfare organizations, veterinary professionals, Indigenous communities, or people working in this field. Rather, I am sharing observations and reflections informed by my experiences and relationships within these spaces. I am particularly grateful to those who have shared their knowledge, challenged my thinking, and helped shape my understanding of this work. And while I am the one presenting today, this work is inherently collaborative, and many of the ideas we'll discuss have been informed by a much broader community of people working at this intersection. And so, just before we jump in, I'd like to, if people want to use the chat, they're free to do this. You can introduce yourselves by sharing where you're from, which sector best describes your current role, and where you've learned firsthand about veterinary social work. Throughout today's presentation, I'll be posing a number of questions for us to reflect on and discuss using the chat. Because we only have an hour, I've packed this presentation with a lot of information. I haven't left much space to have deep discussion on these questions throughout. And so I just invite you to use the chat to share your thoughts and experiences and perspectives if you like. And if you'd prefer to simply reflect on these questions privately, that's perfectly okay too. One of the things I've learned throughout this work is that there is a tremendous amount of knowledge already present in the room, and I am looking forward from learning from your experiences as well. And so just to go over some of the key learnings, so veterinary social work continues to grow internationally and across Canada, formal roles remain pretty limited. At the same time, professionals across veterinary medicine, animal welfare, social services, housing, outreach, and education are already engaging in this work at this intersection of social work. And so we're going to be looking at veterinary social work as an emerging ecosystem by looking at those gaps and where the work's already happening and where social work fits in these ecosystems. And so I created this little visual to kind of give it an idea of like what veterinary social work as an ecosystem could look like. And it could be understood as, and it can be understood as an interconnected ecosystem of people, animals, communities, and environments. And so this is kind of how I framed this presentation today is through this visual. And so I'd like to first look at the gaps and think about the current landscape and how each sector plays a role in how veterinary social work develops and how each has its own strengths, opportunities, and challenges. And so with veterinary social work, one of the most important questions is how people learn about this work in the first place. And when we look across the region, there are certainly pockets of innovation and interest. We have researchers, faculty members, practitioners, and students helping to advance the conversation. However, formal educational pathways remain relatively limited. And so questions begin to emerge. Which questions involve, is there veterinary social work included in the curriculum? Are there practicum opportunities? Are there any interdisciplinary learning opportunities? Is there research occurring in this area? And so and what we're seeing is that students are often seeking out these opportunities themselves. And so as a result of these questions, what we're finding are the current gaps, which are limited dedicated coursework, few formal educational pathways, limited practicum opportunities, and heavy reliance on individual champions rather than institutional structures. Where we see influencing integration is that the field is emerging. There's limited awareness, limited faculty experience, competing curriculum priorities, and lack of formal pathways. So this is where like these are where the gaps, and it sounds like really like, oh, this is dreadful, this is daunting, like this isn't positive at all. But this is just the first part of this presentation is just what are the gaps? These are the gaps. These are the questions to consider. And then moving forward, we look at, what is actually happening? And so in veterinary practice, there's questions that are being asked. Are there dedicated veterinary social worker roles available? Are there referral pathways available? Is staff well-being formally supported? And what we're seeing in the current gaps is that there's limited dedicated veterinary social work positions, there's limited referral pathways, and there's limited psychosocial support services. And again, heavy reliance on individual champions. And there's, again, like the factors influencing integration are very similar to the education. And there's the limited awareness and even workforce shortages and funding and resource constraints, as well as geographic and royal challenges. For animal welfare, the questions that we can consider are, what happens when social workers enter animal welfare settings? What new opportunities emerge? And a big one, what ethical and practice considerations arise? And what supports are needed for staff and clients? And so a lot of what the current gaps are again, there's limited formal social work roles in these spaces. There's limited supervision and consultation. There's limited organizational policies. And again, there's this heavy reliance on individual champions. And factors influencing this is, I would say, like from personal experience working with an animal welfare organization, is the resource and funding limitations. Um, there's also role ambiguity. That is something that I've personally have been challenged with, and limited awareness of social work's potential contributions. Um, though those personally have been struggles of mine working for an animal welfare organization. In social services, historically, many social service systems have focused primarily on human needs, yet for many individuals and families, communities we serve, companion animals are an important part of daily life. And so the questions that emerge are companion animals included in assessment and care planning? Are pet-related barriers identified and addressed? Are pet-inclusive supports available? And then what we see in the gaps is companion animals often are absent from these assessments. There are limited pet inclusive policies and services. Uh, there's limited training on the human animal relationships, and there's inconsistent consideration of pets and service planning. That's kind of like absent from assessments. So I said that twice. That's how important it is. Um, and I've seen this working in social services when I've worked on the downtown east side, is that people are often being put in a position where they have to choose between housing or their companion animal. And so there's this gap of there's this lack of consideration. And it's because there's limited pet inclusive options, especially in housing. Um, and the factors influencing this are the housing and policy barriers, fragmented service systems, again, like that limited awareness and training, and that it is very human-centered service models. And so across all four sectors, we're seeing many of the same themes repeated. And and what we're seeing is that the interest continues to grow, new opportunities are emerging, yet much of this work still depends on individual people and informal relationships and practitioners creating opportunities where none currently exist. Formal pathways remain limited, and interdisciplinary integration remains inconsistent. And many practitioners are doing this work without formal recognition, education, supervision, or support. And so just looking at, your own region or profession or organization, this is a question that I'm posing to people that they can feel free to use the chat or not. And that is, what gaps have you observed? One of the interesting things about these gaps is that they can sometimes make it appear as though veterinary social work is absent. But when we look more closely, a different picture begins to emerge. And so in this part of the presentation, we'll look at examples of how this work is already occurring across the same systems, often without formal veterinary social work roles or recognition. And I think it's helpful to briefly look beyond the region and look where established examples have emerged across Canada. Um, while it's still developing nationally, there are several provinces that have built stronger educational pathways, resource programs, practicum opportunities, and organizational partnerships. And first of all, first of which is Saskatchewan. It has provided an important example through the Western College of Veterinary Medicine. In 2015, they established a veterinary social work program that has supported research, student learning opportunities, and community partnerships. And while and that's still ongoing as well. And so it's been around for quite some time. And then in places like Ontario, Nova Scotia, In Ontario, we've seen multiple examples of integration across education and practice. For example, the University of Toronto has developed practicum partnerships with the Toronto Humane Society, creating opportunities for social work students to gain direct experience in animal welfare settings. The Ontario Veterinary College and the University of Guelph have incorporated social work supports into veterinary education and practice environments. Organizations such as the Ottawa Humane Society have also explored social work integration. And together, these examples have helped create a more established network of supervision, research, student placements, and professional development opportunities. In Nova Scotia, this also offers an important example because much of the development has been influenced through Dr. Cassandra Hanrahan and Dalhousie University, which now has a course in their BSW program that she has developed that addresses this intersection of social work. And through the teaching and research and community partnerships, veterinary social work has become increasingly visible within the region. Opportunities for student placement have emerged, partnerships have developed with animal welfare organizations, and graduates have begun moving into practice roles connected to the field. And so this is an example of how through this collaboration it has grown into an emerging area of practice. And what I find interesting is that it didn't happen overnight. It developed through these relationships and through individual champions who helped build that momentum over time. And so one of the most interesting things I've observed in British Columbia is that much of this growth is not necessarily it hasn't at all really been driven by formal curriculum. Instead, it's often been driven by individual students like myself. I had created my own practicum at the Vancouver Humane Society. I advocated for myself to be placed in a non-traditional social work setting. And many people are also doing that as well. Many have backgrounds in animal welfare, veterinary medicine, rescue, advocacy, or community services before even entering these social work programs. And others have longstanding interests in human-animal bond and are looking for ways to bring those interests into their professional practice. That's very similar to what my experience has been. And as I said, students are seeking non-traditional practicum placements and are advocating for these opportunities. And what we're seeing is that students are creating these pathways without formal pathways currently existing through the curriculum. They're seeking placements in these settings and they're looking for mentorship. They're pursuing continuing education and they're asking questions that traditional curriculum has not always addressed. And so to me, that's an important indicator. Fields don't grow because institutions decide they should exist. They often grow because people see a need and begin creating the pathways forward. And so this is where it's just like, okay, now the universities need to like catch up. Like let's get it going, right? Um, Through conversations with veterinary clinics across BC, common themes have emerged, which is that many veterinary professionals recognize the value that social work could bring to both clients and veterinary teams. Some are familiar with veterinary social work as a profession, many are not. But regardless of whether they use the term veterinary social work, many describe very similar needs. They talk about grief and end of life support, client distress and crisis situations, difficult conversations, resource navigation, staff well-being and compassion fatigue. And the challenge is often not recognizing the need. The challenge is identifying sustainable pathways for implementation. So this is where funding remains a significant barrier. Dedicated positions remain limited, yet the interest continues to grow. And veterinary professionals are trying to fill those gaps themselves without the education either, because they did not get social work or counseling education in their own journeys through veterinary practice. And so they're often having to fill those gaps. And And so that's what I find very interesting. And there are specific veterinary clinics like throughout BC and through Alberta that are trying to do that um, without that support and without that funding. And then that just really fuels that burnout and that compassion fatigue, in my opinion. And then while veterinary systems are beginning to recognize this work, there are other sectors where many of these functions have already been occurring for several years. And so in many animal welfare organizations, they're already carrying out functions that closely align with veterinary social work or just social work in general. Staff are helping people access care. They're navigating financial hardship. They're providing referrals and resource navigation. They're supporting people experiencing grief and loss. They're advocating for systems change. They're supporting staff well-being. And I've seen that firsthand just at my work in the Vancouver at the Vancouver Humane Society through the program that I help assist with. And I mean, they are through that program where we provide funding for veterinary assistance to low-income individuals and families across BC. We're having those conversations with people who are in distress, who cannot afford veterinary care. There's often so many other factors that are happening in their lives, and we are providing this level of support, this level of referral or resource navigation that um, that the people in these organizations were not trained for, and do not have the proper setup or policy to support it either. And that leads to burnout and compassion fatigue. Uh, you, Thankfully, like I've come into this program and I have that background, and so I can this comes very naturally to me where navigating these different challenges for people's lives are like this is what I do, right? This is what I've been doing for the last decade. But I'm working with people who have been doing this in this program since for the last years, and they don't have the background that I have. And so, but it's already happening uh, informally. And we're also seeing this at organizations like Pause for Hope and Community Veterinary Outreach Initiative, which is nationwide. We're seeing it in places like For Paws Food Bank Foundation, which is in Kamloops. They're doing a lot of work in this, working with social service organizations. We're seeing this with Mission Possible and Increased Access, which works with remote Indigenous communities, and they're providing both animal welfare and social services. And we're seeing this in organizations like Elder Dog, which is also national. Um, and again, like some of them do have formal social work involvement, but many don't. And there's not a title. And so regardless, though, the work is happening. And it's very similar in social services across housing programs, shelters, outreach teams, Indigenous organizations. People have long been supporting people and their companion animals without formal recognition and, very importantly, without specific training. In working in systems across all of which that do not support this at all, like that does not include companion animals. Um, and so what often happens is that it's without realizing what they're doing even aligns closely with veterinary social work principles or social work in general. Um, and we can see this through, as an example, Atira's pet outreach program. Atira is a supportive housing society in BC, primarily in the Lower Mainland, and they have a pet outreach program. It's been really great. It's been going for the last, I think, since 2021, and they have been addressing those pet-related barriers. They support their clients in housing that have companion animals, trying to fill those gaps. And so again, though, like they are doing it like without that formal recognition, without that formal training. Um, and even the question is what is formal training? But at the end of the day, practitioners are helping people navigate these decisions involving their animals, and they're addressing so many different things, including animals and safety planning and pet-related housing barriers and access to veterinary care. Um, and many recognize that companion animals are a part of family systems, support systems, and community systems. And it is happening again, like going back to the first part about talking about individual champions. This is happening throughout, just in social services, especially. I'm seeing that it really comes down to individual people in different programs, in different organizations that is doing a lot of this work, um, and without the support. But it's happening, and that's a big deal. And so this is another a question that I would pose is where do you see veterinary social work occurring in your organization or community, even if it's not formally recognized? And again, like that's something that you can reflect on or something that you can put in the chat. And I think that what connects all these examples is that it's not veterinary social work isn't confined to a single role, profession, or organization. It emerges wherever the well-being of people and animals intersect. Veterinary social work is not always a new service. Sometimes it's a new way of understanding work that is already occurring. And that's really what I've seen. And we can put the formal title of veterinary social work on somebody. Ultimately, it's social work at this intersection or in these settings where we're considering companion animals in a person's life. Like that's really what it comes down to. And even if that's what all it means is that we end up just including that in curriculum in university programs where we're considering companion animals in people's lives. Like that's a huge step because again, like we don't necessarily need these formal titles, but I think like we do need support and knowledge and education. And so why does any of this even matter to begin with? At the heart of veterinary social work is a recognition that companion animals are often important members of people's, not even often, are uh, important members of people's family support systems and communities. And if that's true, then it challenges us to think differently about how we assess needs, provide support, and understand relationships. And throughout my work and likely throughout many of yours, I have heard people describe companion animals in ways that go far beyond ownership. And people have described them as family, as best friends, as protectors, as a source of comfort, as sometimes as the reason they got through a difficult period of their life, sometimes as the reason they sought help, and sometimes as one of the few consistent relationships they have. And when we recognize these relationships, we gain a full understanding of people and communities we serve. Because if an animal plays a significant role in someone's life, then that relationship may influence housing decisions, healthcare decisions, safety planning, grief experiences, financial choices, and help-seeking behaviors, which I think we all know that. Um, um, eh, and in other words, the animal is not separate from the assessment. The animal is a part of the story. And we're actually seeing this. We're seeing this happening across a variety of systems. In housing, there's growing attention to pet inclusive policy and the barriers that pet restrictions create. That is a huge thing that is happening in BC right now with the recent collaboration between the BC SPCA and United Way, which has focused on advancing pet-friendly housing practices. Um, we see this in emergency planning, where we continue to learn from experiences during wildfire, floods, and evacuations that people and animals often need to be planned for together. And in family law, some provinces are beginning to recognize that companion animals occupy a unique place within family systems. Again, that is something that's happened in British Columbia, where now companion animals are being considered in regards to custody and custody partnerships. And in animal welfare legislation, public policy, we continue to see growing discussions around animal well-being and animal protection. This has recently been happening in Alberta. And although approaches such as One Health and through approaches such as One Health and One Welfare, we're increasingly recognizing that human well-being, animal well-being, and community well-being are interconnected. And across all these systems, we're beginning to see a broader shift in how these relationships are understood. And so this is happening. This is and and it's happening across all systems. And so the question becomes like, where do we fit in all this? If companion animals are increasingly being recognized across housing, healthcare, education, justice, emergency response, community services, and family systems, then this is the important question that emerges. I mean, social workers already exist across all of these systems. We work with individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities. We help navigate barriers, access resources, cope with loss, strengthen relationships, and advocate for change. So if companion animals are influenced many of these experiences, what might it mean to intentionally include them within our understanding of practice? And so this is where I absolutely love this framework. And it is just one framework. This is something that came out last year. It is the Social Work in Animal Welfare Framework. What I appreciate about this framework is that it situates human-animal relationships within traditional social work thinking. It doesn't just require us to reinvent social work. Instead, it helps us apply familiar concepts in a broader way and looks at it from a micro level, which is when we think about individuals and families, at a meso level, which is with groups, organizations, communities, and a macro level, which is public policy, advocacy, and systems and social change. And this framework helps us see that companion animals can be relevant across all levels of social work practice. And so we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. You know what I mean? And I just love this. The guideline, this document is just when I remember I read it and I was like, this is amazing. This needs to be everywhere. Um, so what happens when we include animals in social work? Um, at the micro level, we include them in assessments and grief work and safety planning. Um, at the meso level, we develop support groups and we collaborate with animal welfare organizations or veterinary practices, and we engage with community outreach. At the macro level, we consider housing policies and family law and emergency planning, as well as access to care initiatives. The key point is that including companion animals does not narrow social work. It often expands our understanding of the systems and relationships already influencing people's lives. And I think it's important to acknowledge the idea of relationality. Many Indigenous worldviews have long emphasized interconnectedness, relationships, and responsibility. While I don't speak for Indigenous communities or knowledge systems, I think there is value in reflecting on what these perspectives invite us to consider. Rather than seeing people, animals, communities, environments as separate, relational approaches encourage us to think about how they are connected. This shifts the conversation from ownership to relationship, from individual needs to interconnected well-being, and from isolated systems to shared responsibility. For me, this perspective strengthens many of the conversations happening within veterinary social work today. And really it's these relational perspectives are pre-existing. And it's like we're trying to catch up or develop something to something that's already existing, which I find really fun. And so how does recognizing companion animals as part of a person's family system change the way we approach our work? Does it change the questions we ask? Does it change how we assess strengths and supports? And there isn't necessarily one right answer, but I think these are important questions for us to continue exploring as veterinary social work evolves or as social work evolves at this intersection. And so, how do we strengthen this work moving forward? What opportunities exist to build stronger connections across education, veterinary practice, animal welfare, and social services? And I think that, you know, just before we look at that exactly, just looking back at what was covered previously, um, which is that there are very passionate practitioners out there, and the interest is growing. And perhaps most importantly, meaningful work is already happening across the sectors. And at the same time, challenges remain. Formal roles are still limited, practicum pathways remain relatively scarce, and recognition is inconsistent. As well, though, opportunities are there to strengthen collaboration. There are opportunities to expand education and training. And there's opportunities to create communities of practice and stronger interdisciplinary connections. In many ways, we're not starting from scratch, is what I'm saying. We're already, when I say that, how do we move forward? We're already moving. I think it's how do we move forward in more intentionally and connected and collaborative. Because we are building on foundations that already exist. And then in regards to, the systems that are beginning to recognize human animal bonds, we're seeing the discussions around pet inclusive housing. We're seeing emergency planning. We're seeing one health and one welfare approaches, and we're seeing companion animals receive greater recognition. And and I think that this creates important opportunities for our profession to contribute. And so just going back to like the diagram that I had kind of presented in part one, um, right here, it kind of changes a little because we have an opportunity. Um, we often look at these systems as though they operate independently from one another. We can, veterinary professionals encounter social issues, social workers encounter animal related concerns, animal welfare organizations support both human and animal well-being, educational institutes prepare future practitioners. But rather than asking where veterinary social work belongs, perhaps it's better to ask, how can veterinary social work help strengthen the connections between the sectors? Because in many ways, we have the potential to act as a bridge. We're not replacing an existing system. I think that we can help them work together more effectively. I think, I mean, I'll speak from my experience, but I know that this is other people's experiences, that we're often working in isolation and we're working in silos. And I think that our what connects us and how we can connect with people is through these relationships that they have with their animals. And then that can in turn create these bridges across these sectors that were originally working very independently and not really effectively. Like, let's be real here. Um, a lot of them are just very counterproductive sometimes. And so this is kind of the challenge, is that I think we can bridge that. We can bridge the gap between these sectors. I think that that's where we have that unique opportunity. And so, because system level change takes so much time, um, there are opportunities within each of our own roles and organizations. And this means that for social workers, we may include companion animals in our assessments. For veterinary teams, it may involve strengthening referral pathways. or recognizing psychosocial needs. And for animal welfare organizations, it may involve consultation pathways or staff support. And for educators and students, it may involve curriculum development and research and practicum opportunities. And none of these actions require waiting for the field to become fully established. We're already beginning. We're already seeing it happen. Um, I think that, when I think about my experience with this, my 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 biggest hindrance was the limited um education piece in my programs through university, through the universities that I went through in BC. Like I had said earlier, there are partnerships happening. There are faculty members in universities in Eastern Canada that are bringing this work into social work programs. And that's really great. And I love that. And a lot of people here in BC are are applying to universities in different provinces because they are offering this. And there's because it's not being offered here in BC. And I think that that says a lot, because it's already so limited for students to get into a program every year, especially if there's only like once a year entry points. And so this is kind of where I challenge universities, especially in BC, where I think that they need to be developing their curriculum a little bit and including these conversations and including the research, because there's so much research on this and on the human animal bond. And again, it's not about like replacing something or or bringing in something new or a new framework. It's not about saying that we can't, disvaluing something else in social work. It's about adding and expanding, right? I think that it just broadens social work even more. Um, yeah. And then why practitioner support matters. I think I don't know about you guys, but I know from my own experience and from many people that I've talked to, many people are doing this work in isolation without formal mentorship and without dedicated supervision and without communities of practice. And often without colleagues who fully understand the unique challenges that arise at this intersection. And I have especially seen that working in an animal welfare organization where they're not bound by the same duties that I am being registered with a college. Um, and because of that, there are no policies or procedures that support that are in place. And so having to navigate that alone in an organization where like you're the only one who is a social worker or the only one with that background or the only one who is considering that without a formal title, but is thinking about it, right? On that broader scale. Um, or you're working in a veterinary practice where you're the only person. You're the only social worker and you're supporting, you know, it could be like I'm thinking about Boundary Bay, um, the veterinary hospital here near where I live here in British Columbia, and they have a veterinary social worker, and there's that person is supporting like 200 staff members and clients by themselves, right? Without that, that say mentorship, or not even mentorship, but like that support, that community of practice support. And working with people who don't have this background and sometimes don't even understand why are you even here, and that can be incredibly stressful because we're coming into this with this knowledge and with this want to be able to help and support people, and and then having that, like that, what I said earlier, that role ambiguity or being alone in it, right? And this is one of the reasons why I believe that practitioner support is so important. And I think that it strengthens confidence and competence, but it also creates opportunities for connection and consultation. And a big one is ethical reflection and collaboration. And across North America and internationally, we are seeing growing numbers of professional networks and communities of practice. And and here in British Columbia, one example is that a community of practice is currently being developed through the BC Association of Social Work. And the goal is not to define who belongs or who doesn't belong in this work. Rather, it's to create a space where practitioners and students and educators and others interested in this human animal bond can connect and learn from one another and share resources and strengthen that practice and just, I think, bring social work forward, expand it a little. Yeah. And looking ahead, I believe one of that next major opportunities is greater involvement from the provincial social work associations across Canada. Um, as we already know, workers are already encountering companion animals in, across all of these different areas that we work, and communities of practice, professional networks, and continuing education opportunities can help support practitioners who are already doing this work, while also creating pathways for those who are interested in learning more. Um, and like I said, it's it's ultimately isn't about creating new roles. It's strengthening what we already are doing and supporting the people who are already doing this work. And so, if you could make one change tomorrow to strengthen veterinary social work in your region, organization, or area of practice, what would it be? What would have the greatest impact? A new partnership, a practicum opportunity, policy change, a referral pathway, greater awareness. And there are no right or wrong answers. It's probably just all of those. Uh, but I'm curious what possibilities you see within your own context. And then, yeah, as I close this up, I'd just like to return to a few key ideas from today's presentation, which is that the work already exists, the relationships already exist, the need already exists. And across Canada, across Western Canada, people are supporting both humans and animals every day. And what we're seeing now is growing recognition of that work and increasing opportunities to strengthen it. And the future of social work may not depend on creating something new entirely. It may depend on strengthening the structures, partnerships, pathways, and communities that allow this work to grow intentionally. And yeah, I think that that is it. And I packed that all in under 50 minutes. And so this actually gives time to um reflect or ask questions. Oh, I see more people joined. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Um, I do want to put this one before I stop sharing my screen. I do want to put this up because um I acknowledged at the beginning of who has, that not only was this, where how far where I've come from, it's been through lived and living experience and through other people's lived and living experience. And I think that these are just a few of the people that have been a big part of my journey. And and so I put that at the end of the presentation. Not sure if I wanted to share it or not, but and I know that some of you that are in here right now are on this list. And and I just, these are the people that they're doing the work here in Canada, right? And that is just absolutely incredible, whether it be in a formal role or not. And anyways, I'll stop sharing my screen now. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dawn. That was amazing. I learned
I
so much.
I learned so much. I talked really fast, so I'm surprised that anyone would have learned anything.
Oh, it was lovely. I am going to
Oh,
go ahead and
lovely.
hit stop record.